Hi, my name's Cassie and I'm from Old Mill Quilting. In this video, we're going to show you how to make your very own beeswax wraps using the BeeKeep beeswax. The first thing you need to do is prep your fabric. So make sure all your fabric is washed, dried and ironed. It's really important to make sure every piece is ironed completely flat because any creases, once the beeswax goes on, will be there for life. Then we're going to take a pair of pinking shears and we're going to cut around the edge of each piece to its desired size. You can do any shape or size that you might need, depending on what you plan to use your beeswax wrap for. Here's everything you'll need to create your beeswax wraps. We have one 100-gram block of BeeKeep beeswax, a grater, a bowl to grate the beeswax into, a tray lined with baking paper to go in the oven, a brush to brush the wet beeswax around the fabric, and a couple of pairs of tongs to grab the beeswax when it's hot. The first thing we need to do is grate our beeswax. Now, the most important piece of advice I can give you on making these beeswax wraps is to make sure that the grater that you use only remains for beeswax products from now on. The reason is it takes too much water and it's too hard to get the beeswax off the grater after you've used it for the first time. So I suggest you go out and buy a cheap grater from Target or Kmart or try the op shop, but don't try and use your favorite grater at home because it's too hard to clean afterwards. So what we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to grate our beeswax straight into the bowl. It's not hard to do. It's pretty much like grating a hard block of cheese. We're going to keep going until we've grated all of the beeswax. As you can see, we've now grated all of our beeswax. So now we can get started. So take your first piece of fabric and place it in your prepared tray. Remember, we've got a tray that's going in the oven with a piece of Glad Bake on top. Now I'm going to take some of the grated beeswax and I'm going to spread it over the top of the piece of fabric. We want plenty to be on here. We want enough to cover the whole thing. Not too much so it's going to be absolutely drenched, but we need enough so the whole piece is covered. So that should be about right for now for this particular size. And now we put it in the oven. So we're going to come over here, pop it in our oven. I've preheated the oven to be about 180 degrees Celsius. Pop the tray in. Close it back up. Now it'll only take approximately 30 seconds for the beeswax to melt. As the beeswax is melting, if you notice that some of the edges aren't quite getting covered, just grab your brush and paste over the edges to make sure the whole thing has been covered in the melted wax. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to take that out. I'm just going to pop it down on the table on top of a cloth so it doesn't get dirty. And now I'm going to grab my tongs. Just because it's going to be hot, it's melted wax. Pick up the sheet. Let it air dry for a few seconds. After about 20 or 30 seconds of air drying, the fabric is cool enough to touch and you can already see and feel the thickness that's gone into it from the wax. You can see the whole piece has been completely covered, nice and evenly. Once it cools down completely, it's ready to go. So let's move on to a slightly bigger piece. One of the biggest questions we get asked is, what if my piece of material is too big for the oven? Well, here's what you do. You do it in exactly the same way. All I'm going to do is fold the material over to make it fit. Doesn't matter how many times, just make it fit in the tray. Just fold it over. As long as you don't have any firm creases, it'll be fine. So now my piece of fabric, might even fold him over a little bit more just to show you. So there, now my piece of fabric fits within the tray. I'm going to do exactly what we did before. I'm going to get my beeswax and I'm going to sprinkle it over the fabric. Now, the sections that have been folded through, you need to make sure you've got plenty of beeswax so that as it melts, it'll melt through the fabric and into the thicker bits underneath. Just to ensure we've got plenty, I might even put just a little bit closer to the edges so that as it melts, it'll melt through. Here's our second piece of fabric ready to go in the oven. Just like we did with our last piece, we're going to go in now and have a look and brush excess wax onto these thicker parts, making sure the entire thing has been completely covered. Alright, he's pretty much done. I'm going to take him out as well. Grab our tongs and pick him up. Again, we're going to let it air dry for a few seconds and then we'll come back and show you the finished result. Here's our two finished pieces. We're now going to let them sit for the next half hour or so to dry and cool down completely. In the meantime, I'm going to show you how you can use your beeswax wraps. Here are some examples of how you can use your beeswax wraps. Let's start with the bowl. Let's say you've had dinner and you've got some leftovers and you want to chuck them in the fridge ready for the next day. If you don't want to use Glad wrap, simply take your beeswax wrap, place it over the top of the bowl, and mold it to the shape of the bowl with your hands. The heat from your hands will melt the beeswax to keep it in place. And just like that, ready to go in the fridge. Our next one, if you've got half a piece of fruit, half an avocado like we have here, or maybe a cut up carrot or apple, we're going to do exactly the same thing. Place your piece of fruit in the middle, wrap the beeswax around, and use the heat from your hands to hold it in place. And that will stay fresh in the fridge. And last but not least, if you've got an open jar of sauce or soup or something maybe, again, beeswax wrap over the top of the jar, heat of your hands to seal it in place. And there we have it. You can use your beeswax wraps as a replacement for Glad wrap. Use them to cover vegetables, fruits, cheese, breads, baked goods. The only thing you can't wrap in them is raw meat. And please don't put them in the microwave. But other than that, you can use them absolutely anywhere. A good tip is if you use 100% cotton to create your beeswax wrap, they're completely biodegradable. Once you're finished with it, chuck it in the compost and it'll completely decompose down. How do you know when your beeswax wrap has reached the end of its lifespan? You'll be able to tell by the feel and also the look of the wrap. You'll be able to see that the beeswax is pretty much worn off and the wrap will lose its consistency. Once that happens, chuck it in the compost and make another. So I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial on how to make a beeswax wrap using the BeeKeep beeswax. We have these 100-gram blocks for sale on our website, www.oldmillquilting.com.au. I hope you found this video informative and we hope to hear from you soon. Bye!